Hey guys, thanks for joining me for the Chapter 3 A Course in Miracles summary. Chapter 3 is the innocent perception, and there's 7 subsections here. My personal favorite was number 3, perception versus knowledge. And we'll do the we'll do the little summary here, and then I might share a little personal tidbit. But Chapter 3. So the summary here is Chapter 3 focuses on perception as the key to healing. It explains how right-mindedness aligned with the Holy Spirit brings clarity and peace, while wrong-mindedness aligned with the ego brings fear and conflict. The goal is to develop innocent perception, seeing without judgment, guilt, or fear. This allows us to recognize our shared holiness and move towards the full acceptance of the atonement. So that's the quick one paragraph summary for chapter 3. And this is a very powerful chapter. When anyone ever tells you, like I've explained, I think in previous videos, that to heal myself, I had to change my perception. This is the exact teaching. This chapter is the exact teaching that describes that in much detail. And if you're confused with what that means in terms of changing perceptions or changing your thoughts, people changing their thoughts, it's really going from wrong-minded thinking, is what they call it, which is fear, conflict, judgment, and shifting into right-mindedness, which is clarity, peace, love, that sort of thing. And it's interesting because Jesus describes it as the right-mindedness is aligned with the Holy Spirit, and wrong-mindedness is aligned with the ego. And so that's a really important distinction there as well. So let's get into our 5 key takeaways for chapter 3. And of course, it goes from 1 to 5, being 5 being the most important for that chapter, but they're all important, like I always say. Okay, number 1, error should be corrected, not punished. God does not punish. When we make errors, they simply need correction through love and truth, not guilt or fear. So I think that's pretty beautiful. I think what Jesus is speaking to here is the fact that we learn better with a carrot rather than a stick. There's some ways of learning where the correction is a punishment, right? And that can be effective, but in the moment. But I don't think it leads to long-term truth and healing and right perspective. And it makes the person that made the error feel guilty about it and creates fear in the future of them and maybe possibly making the same mistake again, when it was simply just an error and maybe needs a loving correction. I like to think of it as a child that makes a mistake, like on a math test or something, 2 + 2 = 5 or something like that. Should we berate the child and tell the child, how stupid they are, or hit them or something to make them learn that 2 + 2 is 4? Or would it be a better perspective to take and maybe give the child a loving correction, say, well, great try, my child, but let's take a look at this again together and let's find the answer, right? And which one's going to stick with the child, and which, how are they going to learn the best and move on from that with more positivity? And anyways, so that's the first point there. Pretty powerful. Key takeaway number 2, perception is learned and can be unlearned. We are not stuck in our current way of seeing. Perception can be retrained through forgiveness and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So it's really showing us, explaining that I believe that we all are stuck in our own perspectives, as it's all we know. Like my perspective is Ryan, your perspective is, Joe Smith. And it's the only perspective we have on life, and sometimes that perspective gets tainted by how we grew up, things that have happened to us, etc. But what Jesus is saying here, it's perception isn't necessarily reality. It is just what we've trained our minds to see, and it can be retrained with some help. Okay, key takeaway number 3, knowledge and perception are not the same. Knowledge is eternal and changeless, rooted in God's reality. Perception is temporary and can be either false, ego-based, or true, Holy Spirit guided. So this is really interesting, and this, I think there's another point here regarding to time. Um, but as I was saying in a previous video, as you get older, your perceptions change on life and on other people, on situations, as you gain a little more experience. And so they change. So it's not something you want to put too much emphasis on as fully true, because it's always changing. So how do you know that it's true? And really, knowledge is, and so they're pointing to the difference of those are perceptions, those change, and be careful with that, right? And knowledge is eternal and changeless. So things that are always true, always will be true, and some things that maybe might be a little bit more beneficial to live by those, that the knowledge, than your perceptions, because you know they're true. So you can search in your life for what you think is knowledge and eternal and changeless, and you can see there's not a lot. I mean, there's entropy in this world. Everything kind of has a cycle. But I'll suggest the one thing that is always true is love, and it's always a truth that if you choose love, I don't think it can ever be looked upon as something that negative or something that you wish you didn't do in the future. So something to think about. Then we'll go down to number 4. 4, judgment blocks true vision. When we judge ourselves or others, we block innocent perception. The ego thrives on judgment. The Holy Spirit teaches us to look with love. Okay, so that's really interesting. Judgment blocks true vision. When we judge ourselves or others, we block innocent perception. So I think sometimes what happens, we have things happen to us in the world, or we see people doing things that we don't consider to be positive, and we maybe make judgments. Oh, how dare that person do that? Why would that person do this? That's mean, that's evil, whatever the case may be. But unfortunately, or even down to the fact of like, that person's wearing a crazy shirt. Why would they? That's crazy. That makes them crazy. Why would they do that? But we have to be careful when these judgments are, although they seem true to the person making the judgment and of value, they in reality are limiting themselves by judging others. Because when we judge others, we judge ourselves through that same lens, and so it limits us on what we can do and what is possible for us, and it makes us guilty if we cross those judgments of that we judge others. So for example, the guy that's wearing a crazy shirt, and we go, look at this guy, he's wearing a crazy shirt, he must be crazy. So if you think that because if you were wearing that shirt, you would feel crazy, you would feel, let's say, uncomfortable. And why is that? Why does it matter what shirt you're wearing? Because you feel judgments of other people on you. And so it's a bit of a loop there. Something to really consider is your judgments down to the level of thought. And a lot of people don't think they have many judgments, or they don't judge. But I would challenge you to hyper evaluate this in your life. And you'll feel a relief when you stop judging, and it relieves you. Right? Okay. Last one, number 5. Seeing innocence is the way back to God. This is the most important point. To return to God, we must see ourselves and others as innocent. This shifts our perception from guilt and fear to love and unity, which is the foundation of healing and the atonement. So number 5, this is the big takeaway for chapter 3. I think it's important to see people as innocent, because if you can see others as innocent, we can see ourselves as innocent. And if we live in a world where everyone is ultimately innocent, however we all make mistakes, it's easy to forgive. It's easier to unify with everybody, to be one with everyone, because we don't separate ourselves. We see them as the same as us. They're also innocent children, let's just say, right? I think that's the best way to look at it. Imagine everyone as a child, a 2-year-old, like they were just an innocent, beautiful child, and they go through life, things happen, and sometimes they get perspectives where they play out not nice things in their lives, and that's a correction that needs to be that person needs to take responsibility for. And the best way we can do that is to support them and see them as that 2-year-old innocent child, and that they've just made a mistake and they need some love. So that's the 5 key takeaways for chapter 3. And now I'll go into my favorite quotes. There's some doozies in here. It's hard, I had to pare this down a little bit, but I'll go through them here. So my favorite quotes for chapter 3: the best defense, as always, is not to attack another position, but rather to protect the truth. And I believe this came up in chapter 1, and I just think it's really powerful, and I think about it all the time because it's so easy to go on the attack. But I think that in some regard, that's the ego coming out and flaring up a little bit, and will result in negative things coming back towards you, and is not the truth. It's a perspective you're taking in that moment. Right? Okay, next quote. Sacrifice is a notion totally unknown to God. It arises solely from fear, and frightened people can be vicious. Sacrificing in any way is a violation of my injunction that you should be merciful, even as your Father in heaven is merciful. Okay, this is a really big point, and a lot of people that are struggling with health issues struggle with sacrifice. And I know I personally did, and I am still working through that to this day. But sacrifice is sort of the notion that you believe that if you were to sacrifice a bit of yourself, that you get something back from somebody else. So you you kind of diminish your own light, your own opinion to in an attempt to get along with somebody else, or really it's an attempt to make a connection with them, but it's not, it's in a way that is a fearful way, a frightened way, and it doesn't lead to good things for yourself. So it's really important to consider that we don't need to make sacrifices to get what we want. We can still be loving and caring and state our opinion and give our value, and still get what we want. And that's the way that Jesus intended it, God intended it, in my opinion. Okay, next quote here. Teachers never terrorize their students. Or sorry, let me say that again. Good teachers never terrorize their students. To terrorize is to attack, and this results in the rejection of what the teacher offers. The result is learning failure. So this goes back to the first quote where when people make mistakes, they don't need to lord it over them. They don't need to be more guilty than they already feel themselves, I'm sure. And it's just a good point. The good teachers won't terrorize to teach. They will offer a different solution, working together, doing it lovingly, correcting lovingly, and seeing maybe why would it be to the person's advantage to act differently next time. And there's no judgment and no guilt involved. Otherwise, it's likely that the person will repeat the same behavior because they haven't learned the lesson. They just feel guilty, which can perpetuate the behavior. Okay, next quote. Innocence is wisdom because it is unaware of evil, and evil does not exist. So that's self-explanatory. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay, if nothing but truth exists, right-minded seeing cannot see anything but perfection. So I think it's a very simple point, but it really points to the fact that, like, if you're in your right mind, you cannot see anything but perfection in the world. And I had a really powerful experience one time where I was telling a friend of some issues I was having, and I thought, they were pretty serious, and the person respectively was listening, but every time I would say an issue or say something about my story, this individual just kept repeating back, "Oh, that's just perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect." And it was really confusing to me because I'm explaining some things that I don't think are perfect. I don't see it that way. But it really made me realize that, like, he really did see it as perfection. He sees these as opportunities for healing and opportunities to change perspectives, and that's perfect, and it's beautiful in a way, and it's beautiful these opportunities are in front of us. And so when you can see the world as perfect, it's a great guide to show you that you're seeing correctly. And when you look out into the world and you see imperfection, those may be things that you should consider to look at. And I promise you, even though there's some crazy things that happen in the world, there's a way to understand it that will give you peace. Okay, next one. Yet this vision can be perceived only by the truly innocent, because their hearts are pure. The innocent defend true perception instead of defending themselves against it. Okay, next one. If you perceive truly, you are canceling out misperceptions in yourself and in others simultaneously. Because you see them as they are, you offer them your acceptance of truth so they can accept it for themselves. This is the healing that the miracle induces. So it's interesting that when you perceive others correctly, you also help perceive yourself correctly. And that's kind of the judgment piece. What you judge in others, you judge in yourself. So if you stop judging others, just stop judging yourself. You get a value there for yourself. You're not just doing it for the other person's sake. You're really doing it for your own sake. Okay, next quote. Forgiveness is the healing of the perception of separation. Perception is based on a separate state, so that everyone who perceives at all needs healing. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, it goes back to the point of the root cause of illness really is the fact that we feel like we're separate and we have needs that need to be filled in this world, and other people are either denying those needs from us or keeping us from them or whatever, right? And really that's where forgiveness heals that separation. The only way to be able to get closer to a brother or sister or a friend or whatever is to be able to forgive them completely for anything they've done, and that allows you to dissolve any judgments or hate or fear or resentments against them, and ultimately that allows you to be closer to that person. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they say, but it won't alienate yourself, which is important. Okay, last few here, and then we are closing this one out. Last one. It's a bit of a big one, but it's important, so in my opinion. So you can see in many ways because perception involves interpretation, and this means that it is not whole or consistent. If we continue on in the book here a little bit, questioning illusions is the first step in undoing them. The miracle or the right answer corrects them. Since perceptions change, their dependence on time is obvious. How you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and actions must occur in time. Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. So it's a pretty big doozy here. We've talked about this in a little bit in this video already, but in terms of perception involves interpretation, and perceptions can change over time. So to put too much value on perception, I would believe, is not the correct way to think. However, in that moment, it seems like the only way to think. We need to be careful and remember what we understand as timeless knowledge. And that, in my opinion, is pointing to love. And so the other point here that's really important that you can gloss over is saying questioning illusions is the first step to undoing them. The miracle of the right answer corrects them. So questioning illusions, in my experience, the best way to do that is when you have judgments, when you have moments of conflict with others, is to investigate that and see down at the root, where is that coming from? And ultimately it's typically fear or guilt. And it's saying what the miracle is, what we've learned is changing your mind from fear to love is what corrects them. So if you can go back to that situation and change your mind on it, change your perception from that fear perception, like maybe you were judging somebody because you're ultimately don't want to be associated with them, but that is ultimately fear. And I don't know if that is in your best best interest for healing purposes. So really powerful, chapter 3. It's a great chapter, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for listening, and hope you take the time to go ahead and read it. And please feel free to leave any comments about what was your favorite part of the chapter or anything you'd like to discuss. I'd be happy to share my opinion. All right, love you lots, guys. Take care.